Good day and welcome back to the shed. Previously, I did a bit of an unboxing of a book haul that I did, and one of the novels that jumped out at me was Michael Moorcock's Behold the Man. So tonight, I thought I would take a break from our Hugo and Nebula award-winning novel Shed Ladder here and take a bit of a look at Michael Moorcock's 1969 novel, I believe it was, and give you a quick review. Now, I've only just finished reading this book, literally 10 minutes ago. And I thought I'd do a quick ad hoc spontaneous review of this novel, and like I said, and take a bit of a break from the Hugo Nebula award-winning novels. So I wasn't familiar with Michael Moorcock. For some reason he has slipped past my radar, and I believe this is the first book that I've read from Michael Moorcock. I may have heard some books online. I have a tendency to put audio books in the background, so I may have read one or two books audially, if you like, but this is the first actual novel I recall reading from Michael Moorcock. I may be mistaken in that, but and the thing that jumped out at me is really the blurb at the back, which says, "This is perhaps the most controversial portrait of Christ ever painted." And that sort of jumped out at me. I thought, hey, that sounds interesting. And I thought, why not just have a quick read? It's only, what is it, 140 odd pages. So only it took a day or so to read through it. And I thought it'd be a good break from our sci-fi shed ladder here and give me an opportunity to review something a little bit different. So I did a bit of quick research on this, and what I learned is that this novel first came out in a novella format in 1966, and it actually won the Nebula, rather. It won the Nebula in 1967 for the best novella for that year. So it's sort of highly acclaimed short story version, at least. And I thought, let's give it a go. So the story follows this guy called Carl Glogagio. I cannot pronounce it for the life of me. Carl Glogagio, I believe it is, but I'm going to call him Carl for the rest of this novel. And Carl, I don't know what else to say, but he seems to be a very messed up fellow, and I'm hoping it's not Michael Moorcock in an autobiographical sense, because the guy needs some serious help. So the book is basically a time travel tale, and what happens is that this Carl is sent back in time. He's been given an opportunity to travel back in time, and he's decided that he wants to see the crucifixion. So he's been sent to 28 AD, and he wants to witness the events leading up to and the crucifixion of Jesus Christ as portrayed in the Gospels. So what happens is that Carl, we learn, and the book sort of goes between present day, as in our present day, or when the novel was written, present day, back to Babylonian, Nazareth, Galilee time frame, period, right? So in 28 AD. And it sort of alternates between present time and biblical times, and I thought the balance was quite nice. I actually enjoyed the balance of flipping back and forth, so you got a bit of a feel for what led up to Carl taking this journey and why some of his beliefs and ultimately what happens in the book sort of makes sense. If it didn't have the back and forth, it'll make Carl even a crazier person that he appears to be in the actual novel itself. So so the narrative goes back and forth between present and biblical times, and what happens is that Carl gets sent back to 28 AD, and he's introduced, or he meets up with John the Baptist. And John the Baptist was basically a prophet in the Old Testament, or in the New Testament rather, who sort of welcomed or beckoned in the coming of the Christ, of the Messiah. So he meets up with John the Baptist, and the biblical account of John the Baptist and the biblical account of Joseph and Mary and Jesus himself are not what is portrayed in this novel, hence the controversial aspects of the novel. So he goes back in time, and he's a really messed up dude, this Carl Glogagio. But anyway, so very controversial in the sense that the biblical accounts of the gospel and what Carl Glogagio goes back to are not poles apart, but it still makes a rather interesting book. So, yeah, so he goes back in time, and I've read some of the reviews online, and it makes it sort of difficult to talk to the storyline without giving spoilers away, because that's some of the controversial aspects of the novel. But I'll go as far as to say this. He goes back in time, and he's got some delusions of grandeur, this Carl guy, and he's got some really mixed up issues going on in his head, and he really needs to come to terms with his spirituality and make a decision somewhere in his life. And I think those decisions lead him to a path which is, I hate to say, but almost cliche, not even cliche, but predictable, right? It's sort of, you only have to read, you know, a couple of chapters to sort of foresee what the future events are. Now, the controversial elements of the novel, again, difficult to talk to without giving the storyline away and the plot away, because I think it is a worthwhile reading book, right? But I would say this much. Those controversial aspects of the book, if you're of the Christian faith and you're quick to be offended, then I'll say do not read this novel. Right? There are definitely elements of this novel that will offend some people, admittedly so. But I'll say this much for it: you don't need to be a Christian apologetics degree or have a master's degree in Christian apologetics to refute some of the things or the claims of the historical accuracy of this novel. I don't think Moorcock set out to say, hey, this is a true account of the gospel, and this is a true account of these people, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, and John the Baptist. These are the real events leading up to the crucifixion. I don't think the book aims to do that. It is a science fiction novel, and you've got to read it as such, because I think, you know, I wouldn't be offended, but I can understand there would be some people out there who might see this confronting and offensive to them, right? So do keep that in mind. And I don't want to speak to what some of those things are, what is controversial about it, because as predictable, and I think it's almost like he's set out to offend you, right? Like, and it's sort of like, I don't know, it's like, it hasn't, to me at least, he hasn't done it in a provocative way that makes you think, right? I think he's done it in a way to get that shock horror treatment from people, right? I think he's expecting a particular shock factor, and why he talks the way he does in the book. Some, you know, the choice of language, some of the things that happened in the novel that I think, well, okay, is that really just there for the shock factor, or did you want to tell a story? And sometimes you lose, at least I thought, I lost, what are you doing just for the sense of the shock factor, as opposed to you telling a tale and a thought of experiment here, right? Or a fictional account, or what a personal belief a person may have in Carl, and what sort of actions would he take in a historic context where things don't quite happen the way you hoped. So I did enjoy the book, and I also saw some echoes of Robert Silverberg in Michael Moorcock's writing. So I wouldn't say he's in the same league as Robert Silverberg, at least from what I've read of this one book, but I definitely saw echoes of Robert Silverberg in the dialogue, in some of the back and forth. So yeah, I'll be interested in your thoughts around Michael Moorcock, if you're familiar with Robert Silverberg, and if you saw the same thing I saw in this novel, especially if you read this novel. But I don't know, I got some echoes of it, but I'm not convinced. I would definitely want to read more Moorcock to see what I feel about him. But I may be also, my thoughts may be clouded by the fact that Robert Silverberg wrote Up the Line, which is an awesome, one of my favorite books, which talks to time travel as well. But he's done it, I think, in a much more tasteful way. A much better book, in my opinion. Absolutely love Up the Line. And, you know, what happens here is that why this may be giving me Robert Silverberg vibes is that what happens in this book is that people go back to witness historical events as a tourist destination. So time travel has become the norm. At least this is what I remember of the book. It was 20 odd years ago I read it, so I really got to reread it. But that's how memorable this book was for me. But people would go back to historical events like the Sermon on the Mount, for example, and they were faced with a challenge that these historical events now had thousands upon thousands of people that weren't there in the original event because of all these time travelers, these basically tourists, time tourists, right? And he goes back, like I said, to see the Sermon on the Mount and other historical counts. But I thought it was a lot more tasteful, a lot better concept, absolutely wonderful book in Robert Silverberg's Up the Line. So yeah, like I'm not quite sure if what I read in Moorcock was tainted, sorry, I dropped the book, was tainted by my recollection of Up the Line by Robert Silverberg. But I did see, like I said, echoes of that. So I'm really interested in your thoughts and opinions on that. So look, controversial aspects, I think it's more shock for the sake of shock than it is any real controversial subjects. I don't think that anyone would seriously take the story as a work of, oh yeah, maybe that's really what happened, or this is a historical Jesus, or this is a historical Mary. I just don't think that's what Moorcock did. I think he's just written a story. It was a time travel tale. I think it's an interesting concept, and I think it's really about one man's challenge and just how far would you go for your beliefs, even in the face of those your belief systems crumbling down. So I think that's what the story really is about, and that's why I think it's worthwhile reading, right? Because it really is, I think, just about that. It's about how far would a man go for his belief systems, even in the face of those belief systems crumbling down. And in that sense, I think it's a worthwhile read. So, you know, out of 5, we can't do the Hugo and Nebula ladder thing. So I'm not going to go through my normal criteria and try to rank this, because it's not in the Hugo and Nebula. But I did enjoy reading the book, and I'd give it like a 3 to 3.5 out of 5. So yeah, Michael Moorcock, Behold the Man. Offensive, I didn't find it offensive, but I can see why some people would. Is it an enjoyable read? Yeah, it is, and I think the reason I would still, you know, read it is because it is only a short read. It's 140 odd pages, like I said. But who would I recommend it to? Maybe that's the better one, right? Because this is an interesting one. Who would I recommend Moorcock's The Behold the Man? This is an interesting question. Because if I was to recommend a good time-traveling book, for me, it'll be Up the Line first and foremost. And maybe not first and foremost. There's quite a few in my past reads that I would highly recommend for a story. But in the same kind of vein, right, where you're going back to biblical times or other historic times, and the effect that time travel has on individuals, on certain events, the challenges you have in that. I mean, I would 100% recommend Up the Line over Moorcock's Behold the Man. People who enjoy time traveling tales. If you have the Christian faith, you know, you may need to just be careful. I see some people may be offended in this book. There are some pretty in your face, you know, potentially offensive things in that book for you. But like I said, I don't think you need to be an apologetics theologian to dismiss a lot of the thoughts in the book. But I would say be wary if you're, you know, easily offended, or not even easily offended, but if you're offended in that way, right, when it comes to your belief systems. So there may be elements of that. But I thought it was a relatively well-researched novel. If you like that sort of shock factor, if you like to poke a bit of fun at times, it may appeal to you. It may also appeal to I don't know, just about anyone really. It's not a bad book. 3.5 to 4.5, 3 to 3.5 out of 5 for that particular book. Hey, it's been Peter. This has been The Shed. A bit of ad hoc mumbling and mucking around. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time in The Shed.